The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla walked briskly toward the main entrance. Her heels clicked against the ancient stones, echoing in the quiet morning air. She clutched a leather briefcase tightly in her left hand, while her right hand nervously adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck. Security guard Marcus Thompson had been working at the palace for 15 years. He knew every face, every routine, and every protocol by heart. When he saw the Queen approaching with an unfamiliar briefcase, his training kicked in immediately. Something felt different about her demeanor today. She seemed anxious, constantly looking over her shoulder as if someone might be following her. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Marcus said, stepping forward with a respectful bow. "I'm afraid I need to inspect your briefcase today. New security protocols from the Metropolitan Police." Camilla's face went pale. She had never been asked to have her personal belongings searched before. The briefcase contained items she had hoped to keep private, items that could change everything if discovered. "Surely that's not necessary, Marcus. You've known me for years." Marcus felt uncomfortable but remained firm. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but the orders come from the highest level. There have been threats against the royal family recently. Everyone must follow the same security measures regardless of rank." The Queen's hands trembled slightly as she reluctantly handed over the briefcase. Marcus noticed her nervousness and wondered what could possibly make the Queen of England so anxious about a simple security check. He had seen her remain calm during state visits, public speeches, and even during the most challenging moments of her royal duties. Inside the briefcase, Marcus discovered something extraordinary. Beneath some official documents and personal letters, he found a collection of items that seemed completely out of place. There were old photographs, handwritten notes, and what appeared to be pieces of antique jewelry wrapped in velvet cloth. One photograph caught his attention immediately. It showed a young woman who looked remarkably similar to Camilla, standing next to a man Marcus didn't recognize. The photo was dated 40 years ago, long before Camilla had married King Charles. The woman in the photo was wearing the same pearl necklace that Camilla wore today. The handwritten notes were even more intriguing. They appeared to be love letters, written in elegant cursive handwriting. The letters spoke of secret meetings, hidden treasures, and promises of eternal love. Marcus couldn't help but read a few lines, though he knew he was violating the Queen's privacy. "My dearest Margaret," one letter began, "the treasures we discovered in the old manor house must remain our secret forever. If anyone ever finds out about what we found in the hidden room, it could destroy everything we've worked for." Marcus looked up at Camilla, who was watching him with growing panic in her eyes. "Your Majesty, I think we need to discuss these items with my supervisor." "Please, Marcus," Camilla whispered, her royal composure finally cracking. "You don't understand what you're looking at. Those items, they're not what they seem." But Marcus had already seen too much. Among the jewelry pieces, he recognized several items that matched descriptions from a famous art theft that had occurred decades ago. The theft had never been solved, and the missing treasures were worth millions of pounds. The Queen's secret was beginning to unravel. For years, she had carried the burden of knowledge about treasures that weren't rightfully hers. The briefcase contained evidence of a past she had tried desperately to forget, a past that connected her to one of Britain's most notorious unsolved mysteries. As Marcus continued to examine the contents, he found a small brass key wrapped in tissue paper. Attached to it was a note in Camilla's own handwriting that read, "Room 47, East Wing, Clarence House, behind the portrait of Lady Margaret." Marcus realized he was holding evidence of something much bigger than a simple security violation. The Queen had been hiding treasures, but the question remained. Were they stolen goods, or was there another explanation for this mysterious collection? Camilla watched as Marcus documented each item with his phone camera. She knew that once this information left the courtyard, there would be no stopping the investigation that would follow. Her carefully guarded secret was about to become public knowledge. "Marcus, before you report this, please let me explain," Camilla said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The story behind these items is not what you think. Yes, they are valuable treasures, but they weren't stolen. They were hidden for protection, and I've been their guardian for longer than you can imagine." Marcus paused his documentation. Something in the Queen's voice made him want to hear her story before taking any official action. He had always respected her, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than met the eye. "The woman in that photograph," Camilla continued, pointing to the picture Marcus had first noticed. is my sister Margaret. She died 25 years ago. But before she passed away, she entrusted me with a secret that has haunted our family for generations. Marcus looked again at the photograph. Now that he studied it more carefully, he could see the family resemblance. The woman did look like she could be Camilla's sister, though he had never heard the Queen mention having a sister named Margaret. Your Majesty, if these treasures are legitimate, why keep them hidden? Why carry them around in a briefcase like you're trying to smuggle them out of the palace? Camilla's eyes filled with tears. Because someone has been threatening me, Marcus. Someone knows about Margaret's secret, and they've been demanding that I turn over the treasures to them. I was taking them to a safe place when you stopped me. The morning sun had climbed higher in the sky, and other palace staff were beginning to arrive for work. Marcus knew he had to make a decision quickly. Either he would follow protocol and report this immediately, or he would give the Queen a chance to prove her story was true. The briefcase sat open between them, its contents sparkling in the sunlight like evidence of a crime or proof of an incredible family secret. Marcus had stumbled onto something that would change not only his life, but potentially alter the very foundation of the British monarchy. Marcus made his decision in that moment. Instead of immediately calling his supervisor, he chose to listen to Queen Camilla's explanation. Something about her genuine fear and the way her hands shook told him this was more than just a simple case of hidden valuables. Tell me about Margaret, Marcus said quietly, closing the briefcase partially to shield its contents from any passing staff members. Start from the beginning. Camilla looked around nervously before beginning her story. Margaret was my older sister by 3 years. She was brilliant, adventurous, and absolutely fearless. While I was studying to become a teacher, she was traveling the world, working as an archaeologist and historian. The Queen paused, lost in memories of her sister. In 1978, Margaret was hired by a wealthy family to investigate the history of their ancestral home, Ashworth Manor in the countryside. The family had inherited the property, but knew very little about its past. They wanted Margaret to research the house and create a historical record for their family archives. Marcus listened intently, keeping one eye on the palace entrance to make sure no one else was approaching. He had heard of Ashworth Manor before. It was one of those grand English estates with a mysterious reputation, the kind of place that attracted ghost hunters and history enthusiasts. What Margaret discovered at Ashworth Manor changed everything. Camilla continued. The house had belonged to the Ashworth family for over 300 years, but during World War II, it was used as a safe house for valuable artifacts and treasures that were being protected from German bombing raids. This revelation made Marcus's pulse quicken. Many English country houses had served as storage facilities during the war, hiding everything from famous paintings to royal jewels to prevent them from being destroyed or stolen by enemy forces. The problem was that when the war ended, many of these treasures were never properly returned to their original owners, Camilla explained. Some owners had died during the war, others had lost all documentation proving ownership, and some items were simply forgotten in the chaos of post-war recovery. Marcus began to understand the complexity of the situation. So your sister found these forgotten treasures? Not just found them, Camilla replied. Margaret discovered a hidden room in the manor's basement that had been sealed up and forgotten for decades. Inside that room were dozens of items that had been stored there during the war and never retrieved. The Queen opened the briefcase slightly and pointed to one of the pieces of jewelry inside. This sapphire brooch belonged to a Jewish family from London. They gave it to the authorities for safekeeping when they were forced to flee their home in 1941. The family never survived the war, and the brooch was never claimed. Marcus examined the brooch more closely. It was exquisite, clearly valuable, and obviously very old. The craftsmanship suggested it was indeed from the early 20th century, which supported Camilla's story. Margaret spent months researching each item in that hidden room, Camilla continued. She traced their histories, tried to find surviving family members, and attempted to return everything to its rightful owners. But for many pieces, there were no surviving claimants. What did she do with the items that couldn't be returned? Marcus asked. That's where the story becomes complicated, Camilla admitted. Margaret believed these orphaned treasures deserved to be preserved and protected, not sold to private collectors or locked away in some government warehouse. She made a decision that would haunt both of us for the rest of our lives. Marcus waited for her to continue, sensing that the most important part of the story was coming. Margaret decided to become the guardian of these treasures. Camilla revealed. She took them from Ashworth Manor, but not for personal gain. She planned to eventually donate them to museums or find ways to honor the memory of their original owners. The security guard frowned, but taking them without permission would still be considered theft, wouldn't it? Margaret thought she had permission, Camilla explained. The family that hired her gave her written authorization to remove any historical artifacts she found for proper preservation and research. They had no idea how valuable the items were, and Margaret initially believed she was acting within her legal rights. What changed? Marcus asked. Years later, Margaret discovered that the Ashworth family's authorization wasn't legally valid. Camilla said sadly. The family who hired her weren't the true legal owners of the manor. There was a complex inheritance dispute that hadn't been resolved, which meant Margaret had unknowingly taken the treasures without proper legal authority. Marcus was beginning to understand the moral complexity of the situation. Margaret hadn't intended to steal anything, but through a series of misunderstandings and legal complications, she had ended up in possession of valuable items that weren't rightfully hers. By the time Margaret realized her mistake, she had already spent years researching the items and trying to return them to surviving family members. Camilla continued. She had successfully reunited dozens of families with their lost treasures, but she was left with these remaining pieces that had no clear owners. Why didn't she just return them to the manor? Marcus asked. She tried, Camilla replied, but by then, the inheritance dispute had become even more complicated. Multiple parties were claiming ownership of the manor and everything in it. Margaret's lawyer advised her that returning the items could actually make the legal situation worse and might result in the treasures being lost forever in a lengthy court battle. Marcus looked at the items in the briefcase with new understanding. These weren't stolen goods in the traditional sense, but they weren't exactly legally obtained either. They existed in a gray area that made their ownership incredibly complicated. So Margaret kept them? He asked. Margaret spent the last 20 years of her life trying to find a solution, Camilla explained. She consulted with lawyers, historians, and ethical experts, but no one could give her a clear answer about what to do with the treasures. She felt responsible for protecting them, but she also felt guilty about keeping them. When did you become involved? Marcus inquired. Camilla's voice became even quieter. When Margaret was dying of cancer, she asked me to take responsibility for the treasures. She made me promise to continue trying to find a solution, to keep them safe until a proper resolution could be found. The weight of this responsibility was clearly visible on Camilla's face. For 25 years, she had carried the burden of her sister's moral dilemma, trying to honor Margaret's wishes while dealing with the legal and ethical complications of possessing items of questionable ownership. Marcus studied Queen Camilla's face as she continued her explanation. The morning air had grown warmer, but he noticed she was still trembling slightly. There was clearly more to this story than she had revealed so far. Your Majesty, you mentioned that someone has been threatening you about these treasures, Marcus said. Who knows about Margaret's secret? Camilla looked around nervously before answering. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter at Clarence's house. It was addressed to me personally, not through any official channels. The letter contained copies of photographs showing some of Margaret's treasures along with a demand. What kind of demand? Marcus asked, his security training making him alert to any potential threats against the royal family. The writer claimed to be a descendant of the original Ashworth family, Camilla explained. They said they had legal documentation proving their ownership of the manor and everything that was taken from it. They demanded that I turn over all of Margaret's treasures within 1 month, or they would expose the story to the media. Marcus understood immediately why this would terrify the Queen. A scandal involving stolen treasures could seriously damage the reputation of the monarchy, especially if it appeared that Camilla had been hiding valuable items for decades. Did you verify their claims? Marcus asked. I hired a private investigator to look into it, Camilla replied. What he discovered was both disturbing and confusing. The person making the demands is indeed related to the Ashworth family, but their legal claim to the manor is questionable at best. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. The investigator found that this person, who calls himself Jonathan Ashworth, has been researching his family history for years. He somehow discovered that treasures had been removed from the manor during Margaret's investigation, and he's been trying to track them down ever since. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. How did he connect the treasures to you? That's what frightens me most, Camilla admitted. Jonathan somehow obtained records of Margaret's correspondence with various museums and historical societies. In some of those letters, Margaret mentioned that she had entrusted certain items to a family member for safekeeping. The security guard realized the serious implications of this situation. If Jonathan Ashworth had been investigating for years, he might have gathered enough evidence to support his claims, regardless of their legal validity. The worst part, Camilla continued, is that Jonathan seems to have inside information about the royal household. His letters contain details about my daily routines, my private meetings, and even descriptions of items I keep in my personal chambers at Clarence House. This revelation made Marcus deeply concerned for the Queen's safety. Your Majesty, this sounds like stalking. Have you reported this to the police? I can't, Camilla replied desperately. If I involve the police, the story about Margaret's treasures will inevitably become public. The media would have a field day with it. Headlines about the Queen hiding stolen treasures would destroy everything Charles and I have worked to build. Marcus understood her dilemma, but he also recognized the danger she was facing. What was your plan today with the briefcase? I was taking the most valuable pieces to a secure storage facility outside London, Camilla explained. I thought if I could hide them somewhere Jonathan couldn't find them, I might be able to buy time to find a better solution. The security guard looked at the briefcase with new concern. Your Majesty, removing these items from the palace without proper documentation could actually make your legal situation worse. I know, Camilla said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I've been trapped between impossible choices for weeks. If I give Jonathan what he wants, I'm admitting that the treasures were stolen. If I don't, he'll expose the story anyway, and I'll still lose everything. Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. Your Majesty, I think I might be able to help you. Camilla looked at him with hope and desperation. How? My brother David is a lawyer who specializes in property disputes and inheritance law, Marcus explained. He's handled cases involving wartime artifacts and questionable ownership claims. If anyone can find a legal solution to this problem, it's him. But I can't risk involving more people, Camilla protested. The more people who know about this, the greater the chance it will become public. Marcus considered this carefully. What if we approach it differently? What if David researches Jonathan Ashworth's claims without knowing they're connected to you? I could present it as a hypothetical case study. The Queen's expression brightened slightly. Do you think that would work? It's worth trying, Marcus replied. If David can prove that Jonathan's legal claims are invalid, you might be able to call his bluff. And if his claims are valid, at least you'll know what you're really dealing with. Camilla nodded slowly. What about the treasures themselves? I still need to find a way to resolve Margaret's original dilemma. Marcus had been thinking about this as well. Your Majesty, what if the solution isn't about ownership at all? What if it's about purpose? What do you mean? Camilla asked. Margaret wanted these treasures to be preserved and to honor their original owners, Marcus explained. What if you could achieve that goal without worrying about who technically owns them? The security guard's suggestion sparked an idea in Camilla's mind. You mean like creating a memorial or museum exhibition? Exactly, Marcus replied. If you could work with reputable museums and historical societies to create a proper exhibition about wartime artifacts and lost treasures, you could achieve Margaret's goals while also being completely transparent about the item's complicated history. Camilla considered this possibility. But what about Jonathan's threats? If you're being completely open and working with legitimate institutions, Jonathan's threats lose their power, Marcus pointed out. He can't expose a secret that you're already making public in the right way. The Queen felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. It would have to be done very carefully, with the right legal framework and the proper historical context. That's where my brother could really help, Marcus assured her. He understands how to navigate these complex ownership issues while protecting everyone involved. As they continued to discuss the possibilities, neither Camilla nor Marcus noticed a figure watching them from a window in the palace's east wing. Someone had been observing their entire conversation, and that someone was already making plans to use this new information to their advantage. The briefcase sat between them, its contents representing not just valuable treasures, but decades of family secrets, moral dilemmas, and now perhaps the beginning of a solution that could honor Margaret's memory while protecting the monarchy from scandal. 2 days after Marcus had confiscated the briefcase, Queen Camilla found herself sitting in a small cafe in central London, nervously waiting for Marcus's brother David to arrive. She had disguised herself with a simple headscarf and sunglasses, hoping to avoid recognition while conducting this crucial meeting. David Thompson was a different man than his brother Marcus. Where Marcus was tall and sturdy, David was shorter and intellectual-looking, with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful manner of someone who spent his days examining legal documents. When he entered the cafe, he immediately spotted Camilla despite her disguise. "Your Majesty," David said quietly, sliding into the seat across from her. "Marcus has briefed me on the general situation, though he was careful not to reveal too many specific details." Camilla felt nervous about trusting yet another person with her family's secret, but she knew she had no choice. "Mr. Thompson, I need to know if the threats I'm receiving have any legal foundation." David opened a laptop computer and pulled out several folders. "I've spent the last 2 days researching the Ashworth family history and the legal status of their ancestral property. What I've discovered is quite fascinating." The Queen leaned forward, eager to hear what he had found. "The Ashworth Manor case is one of the most complicated inheritance disputes in modern British legal history," David began. "The property has been in litigation for over 30 years, with multiple family branches claiming ownership." "What about Jonathan Ashworth specifically?" Camilla asked. David consulted his notes. "Jonathan Ashworth is indeed a descendant of the original family, but his claim to the property is actually quite weak. His branch of the family tree was disinherited in 1962 due to a dispute over gambling debts and mismanagement of family finances." This news gave Camilla her first moment of relief in weeks. "So his legal claims are invalid?" "Not exactly," David cautioned. "While Jonathan doesn't have a strong claim to the property itself, British law regarding wartime artifacts is extremely complex. If items were removed from the manor without proper authorization, it's possible that any Ashworth descendant could make a claim for their return." Camilla's hopes were dashed. "So he could still force me to give up the treasures?" "That depends on several factors," David explained. "First, we need to establish exactly what legal authority your sister had when she removed the items. Second, we need to determine the current legal status of those specific treasures." David opened his laptop and showed Camilla a database of wartime artifacts. "I've been researching items that were stored at country houses during World War II. Many of these treasures are listed in government databases as unresolved cases, meaning their ownership was never properly determined after the war ended." "What does that mean for Margaret's situation?" Camilla asked. "If the treasures in question are listed in these databases, your sister might actually have been providing a valuable service by researching them and attempting to return them to their owners," David explained. "The government has been trying to resolve these cases for decades." The Queen felt another glimmer of hope. "Could that provide legal protection?" "Potentially," David replied. "But there's something else you need to know about Jonathan Ashworth." David's expression became more serious. "My research indicates that Jonathan has been making similar claims against other families and institutions. He's contacted at least 6 different museums and 3 private collectors, claiming they possess items that belong to his family." Camilla was shocked. "He's done this before?" "It appears to be a pattern," David confirmed. "In most cases, the institutions or individuals paid him settlements rather than fight his claims in court. It's possible that Jonathan is more interested in financial compensation than in actually recovering family heirlooms." This revelation changed everything. If Jonathan was running some kind of scam, then Camilla's situation might be very different than she had believed. "There's more," David continued. "I found records indicating that Jonathan has significant gambling debts and has declared bankruptcy twice in the past 10 years. His sudden interest in family treasures coincides with his most recent financial troubles." The Queen felt anger rising within her. "You're saying he's trying to blackmail me for money?" "It's certainly possible," David replied. "The question is how to handle the situation without creating the public scandal you're trying to avoid." As they discussed strategies, neither Camilla nor David noticed a woman at a nearby table who was listening intently to their conversation. The woman appeared to be reading a newspaper, but she was actually recording everything they said on a small device hidden in her purse. "I have a proposal," David said. What if we approach this situation proactively rather than defensively? What do you mean? Camilla asked. Instead of waiting for Jonathan to expose your story, what if we control how it becomes public? David suggested. We could work with reputable journalists and historians to tell the story correctly, focusing on your sister's noble intentions and your efforts to resolve the situation properly. Camilla considered this idea carefully. But wouldn't that still create a scandal? Not necessarily, David replied. If the story is presented as a tale of family honor and ethical responsibility, it could actually enhance your reputation rather than damage it. The lawyer opened another folder. I've identified several precedents where royal family members have been praised for their handling of similar historical complications. The key is transparency and working with proper authorities. What would that involve? Camilla asked. First, we would need to have all the treasures properly authenticated and cataloged by experts, David explained. Then we would work with the Department of Culture and the relevant museums to create a formal process for resolving their ownership status. David's plan was beginning to make sense to Camilla. And what about Jonathan's threats? Once we've established a proper legal framework, Jonathan's threats become irrelevant, David replied. He can't blackmail you about something you're handling openly and correctly. The Queen felt more hopeful than she had in weeks. How long would this process take? Several months at least, David admitted. But during that time, you would be protected by the fact that you're working within the proper legal channels. As their meeting continued, the woman at the nearby table finished her coffee and quietly left the cafe. She had heard enough to understand the full scope of the Queen's situation, and she knew exactly what to do with this information. David was still explaining the legal process when Camilla's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and felt her blood run cold. The message was from Jonathan Ashworth, and it contained a photo that had clearly been taken just moments ago. It showed Camilla and David sitting at their table in the cafe with a caption that read, "I know about your meeting with the lawyer. My demands have now doubled. You have 48 hours. Camilla showed the message to David, who immediately understood the serious implications. Your Majesty, Jonathan has been watching you. This situation is more dangerous than we realized. The photograph on Camilla's phone changed everything. David immediately closed his laptop and looked around the cafe with the sharp awareness of someone who suddenly realized they were being watched. Your Majesty, we need to leave immediately, David said quietly. If Jonathan has people following you, this meeting has compromised both of our safety. Camilla felt panic rising in her chest. How could he have known about this meeting? Only you, Marcus, and I knew about it. As they quickly gathered their belongings, David's mind was racing through the possibilities. Either Jonathan has access to your phone communications, or someone close to you is providing him with information. They left the cafe separately, with David exiting first and Camilla following 5 minutes later. As the Queen walked quickly toward her waiting car, she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching her from every direction. Back at Buckingham Palace, Marcus was conducting his regular security rounds when he received an urgent text from his brother. The message was brief but alarming. Meeting compromised. Jonathan watching Queen. Need immediate secure location for discussion. Marcus immediately contacted Camilla through encrypted palace communications. Within an hour, all three of them had gathered in a secure conference room deep within the palace, a room that was regularly swept for listening devices and was considered completely private. The situation has escalated beyond what any of us expected, David began. Jonathan Ashworth is not just making legal threats. He's conducting active surveillance of the Queen. Camilla slumped in her chair, feeling the weight of weeks of stress and fear. I should have just given him what he wanted from the beginning. Your Majesty, with respect, that would have been a terrible mistake, David replied firmly. My research has uncovered information that changes everything we thought we knew about this situation. Marcus leaned forward. What did you find? David opened a secure tablet and displayed a series of documents. Jonathan Ashworth is not working alone. He's part of a network of people who specialize in exploiting complicated ownership disputes involving wartime artifacts. The revelation hit Camilla like a physical blow. You mean this is all fake? Not fake exactly, but highly manipulative, David explained. Jonathan does have some legitimate family connection to Ashworth Manor, but he's using that connection as part of a sophisticated extortion scheme. David showed them additional documents. I found evidence that Jonathan has partnerships with several other individuals, including someone who works as a private investigator and someone else who specializes in researching the private lives of wealthy individuals. Marcus understood the implications immediately. They've been building a complete profile of the Queen, learning her routines, her vulnerabilities, and her secrets. Exactly, David confirmed. The goal was never just to recover family treasures. The goal was to find something they could use to extract money from a member of the royal family. Camilla felt a mixture of relief and anger. So Margaret's treasures were just convenient targets for their scheme? I believe so, David replied. If it hadn't been the treasures, they would have found something else to exploit. The room fell silent as all three of them processed this new understanding of the situation. Finally, Marcus spoke up. If this is true, then we're not just dealing with a legal dispute anymore. We're dealing with a criminal conspiracy. David nodded gravely. Which means we need to involve law enforcement, but we need to do it carefully to protect the Queen's reputation and safety. What are you suggesting? Camilla asked. I have contacts in the Metropolitan Police who specialize in cases involving threats against public figures, David explained. They can investigate Jonathan's network without necessarily making the details of your family's situation public. Marcus added his own perspective. From a security standpoint, we also need to identify how Jonathan has been getting information about your Majesty's activities. There may be a security breach that puts you in ongoing danger. As they discussed their options, Camilla's phone buzzed again. Another message from Jonathan, this time containing multiple photographs taken over several days. The photos showed her leaving Clarence's house, meeting with various people, and even walking in her private gardens. He's been watching me for weeks, Camilla said, her voice shaking. How is that possible with all the security around the royal properties? Marcus examined the photographs carefully. Some of these were taken from public locations, but others would have required access to areas that are supposed to be secure. The security guard's training kicked in as he analyzed each image. Your Majesty, I think someone with inside knowledge has been helping Jonathan's surveillance operation. This possibility terrified Camilla more than anything else they had discovered. Someone I trust has been betraying me? We need to find out who, David said decisively. And we need to do it before Jonathan escalates his threats even further. Marcus was already formulating a plan. I can work with palace security to review access logs and surveillance footage. If someone has been providing Jonathan with information or access, we should be able to identify them. How long will that take? Camilla asked. A few days at most, Marcus replied. But in the meantime, we need to change all of your Majesty's routines and security protocols. David agreed. And we need to prepare for the possibility that Jonathan will follow through on his threats to expose the story about Margaret's treasures. Camilla felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. Even if we catch Jonathan and his associates, the story about the treasures could still become public. That's why we need to get ahead of it, David insisted. If we can expose Jonathan's extortion scheme while simultaneously presenting your family's story in the proper context, we can control the narrative. Marcus had an idea. What if we coordinate with law enforcement to arrest Jonathan's network, while simultaneously announcing your Majesty's intention to work with museums and historians to properly resolve the treasure situation? A coordinated response, David mused. It could work, but the timing would have to be perfect. As they continued planning their strategy, none of them realized that their secure conference room wasn't as secure as they believed. The person who had been providing Jonathan with information was still operating within the palace, and they were already planning their next move. Outside the conference room, palace staff continued their daily routines, unaware that a drama involving hidden treasures, criminal conspiracies, and threats against the Queen was unfolding just steps away from where they worked. The treasures that had started as Margaret's attempt to preserve history had become the center of a modern-day thriller that threatened to shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. But now, for the first time since the crisis began, Camilla had allies who understood the full scope of the threat and were prepared to help her fight back. The investigation into the security breach moved quickly once Marcus involved the palace's internal security team. Within 24 hours, they had identified something disturbing. Access logs showed that someone had been using administrative credentials to access areas of the palace they had no legitimate reason to visit. Chief Security, Officer Sarah Collins, called Marcus into her office early the next morning. The logs show unauthorized access to the Queen's private office, her personal quarters, and even the secure storage areas where personal items are kept. Marcus felt his stomach drop. How long has this been going on? At least 3 months, Sarah replied grimly. Someone has been systematically gathering information about Her Majesty's personal belongings, her daily schedule, and her private communications. The security chief showed Marcus computer records that revealed the scope of the breach. Whoever did this was very careful. They accessed the systems during shift changes and used legitimate credentials, which means they either stole someone's access codes or they're someone who already had authorized access. Do we know who? Marcus asked. Sarah pulled up a personnel file on her computer screen. The access pattern matches the schedule and credentials of Eleanor Pierce, one of the Queen's personal assistants. Marcus recognized the name. Eleanor had been working for the royal household for over 5 years and had always seemed completely trustworthy. She had access to the Queen's calendar, her correspondence, and her personal chambers. Are we certain it's her? Marcus asked. The evidence is strong, but we need to be careful about how we handle this, Sarah replied. If Eleanor is working with Jonathan Ashworth's network, we don't want to alert her that we know. Meanwhile, in her private office at Clarence House, Queen Camilla was reviewing the morning newspapers when Eleanor Pierce knocked on her door. Eleanor was a pleasant woman in her 40s who had always been reliable and discreet in her work. Your Majesty, I've prepared your schedule for today, Eleanor said, entering with a folder of documents. You have a meeting with the museum trustees this afternoon, and there's been a request for an interview about the upcoming charity gala. Camilla looked at Eleanor with new suspicion, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. Could this woman she had trusted for years really be betraying her? Eleanor, I've been thinking about making some changes to my security arrangements, Camilla said carefully. There have been some concerns about privacy. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but Camilla noticed that her assistant's hands tightened slightly on the folder she was holding. Of course, Your Majesty. What kind of changes are you considering? I'm thinking about limiting access to my personal schedule and correspondence, Camilla replied, watching Eleanor's reaction closely. Perhaps keeping sensitive information to a smaller group of people. That sounds very wise, Eleanor agreed. There have been rumors about security concerns. Is there anything specific you're worried about? The question seemed innocent enough, but something in Eleanor's tone made Camilla suspicious. Was Eleanor fishing for information about how much the Queen knew about the surveillance? Later that afternoon, Marcus and David met with Detective Inspector James Murphy from the Metropolitan Police. Inspector Murphy specialized in cases involving organized crime and extortion, and he had reviewed all the evidence they had gathered about Jonathan Ashworth's network. This is more sophisticated than most extortion schemes we see, Inspector Murphy explained. The combination of genealogical research, private investigation, and inside access suggests a well-organized operation. David showed the inspector additional evidence he had uncovered. I've found connections between Jonathan Ashworth and at least 4 other individuals who have been involved in similar schemes targeting wealthy families. What kind of connections? Inspector Murphy asked. Financial transactions, shared business addresses, and coordinated timing of their various schemes, David replied. It appears they've been running this type of operation for several years. Marcus provided the security information they had discovered. We believe they have someone inside the royal household providing them with detailed information about the Queen's activities and possessions. Inspector Murphy reviewed the evidence carefully. If we can prove that Eleanor Pierce is working with this network, we can arrest the entire group on conspiracy charges. What do you need from us? David asked. We need to catch Eleanor in the act of passing information to Jonathan's associates, the inspector explained. We're going to set up surveillance and monitor her communications. The plan they developed was risky but necessary. They would feed Eleanor false information about the Queen's plans and see if that information made its way to Jonathan Ashworth. If it did, they would have proof of her involvement. The next morning, Camilla deliberately told Eleanor that she was planning to travel to Scotland the following week to visit a private storage facility where she was going to deposit some valuable family items. I'll need you to make arrangements with the security team there, Camilla said. It's quite urgent, and I want to keep this trip completely confidential. Eleanor nodded and made notes about the supposed trip. Of course, Your Majesty. I'll coordinate everything discreetly. Within 6 hours, Jonathan Ashworth sent Camilla a text message. I know about your planned trip to Scotland. Moving the treasures won't protect you. My final deadline is tomorrow. The trap had worked perfectly. Eleanor Pierce was definitely feeding information to Jonathan's network. That evening, as Eleanor left Clarence's house after work, she was followed by undercover police officers. They watched as she met with a man in a quiet park and handed him a folder of documents. Inspector Murphy's team moved quickly. They arrested both Eleanor and her contact, who turned out to be the private investigator working with Jonathan Ashworth. The next morning, police raids were conducted simultaneously at 3 locations around London. Jonathan Ashworth was arrested at his apartment, along with 2 other associates. Computer equipment and documents seized during the raids revealed the full scope of their operation. Jonathan's network had been targeting not just the royal family, but also several other wealthy individuals and institutions. They had been using genealogical research to identify potential targets, then placing associates in positions where they could gather inside information. Eleanor Pierce had been recruited 3 years earlier when she was experiencing financial difficulties. Jonathan's network had offered her money in exchange for information about the royal household, and over time they had drawn her deeper into their scheme. When confronted with the evidence, Eleanor broke down and confessed everything. She revealed that Jonathan had specifically instructed her to look for information about valuable items that the Queen might be keeping privately, items that could be used as leverage. They told me it was just research, Eleanor said through tears during her police interview. They said they were trying to recover stolen family property, and that I was helping to right a historical wrong. But the documents seized from Jonathan's apartment told a different story. They revealed detailed plans for extorting money from the Queen, with the treasures being just one part of a larger scheme to exploit her position and wealth. The crisis that had consumed Camilla's life for weeks was finally coming to an end, but the resolution would bring new challenges and decisions about how to handle the treasures that had started the entire ordeal. 6 months after the arrest of Jonathan Ashworth and his criminal network, Queen Camilla stood in the newly opened Margaret Pierce Memorial Exhibition at the British Museum. The gallery was filled with the treasures that had caused so much turmoil in her life, but now they were displayed with dignity and proper historical context. The exhibition told the complete story: Margaret's archaeological work, her discovery of the forgotten wartime artifacts, her efforts to return items to their rightful owners, and the complicated legal and ethical questions that arose when no owners could be found. It's exactly what Margaret would have wanted, Camilla said softly to Marcus, who stood beside her as she toured the exhibition. The treasures are being preserved, their histories are being told, and people are learning about the human stories behind each piece. Marcus smiled as he watched visitors, reading the detailed placards that explained each item's journey from its original owners through the war, years, and Margaret's research. Your sister would be proud of how you've handled this, Your Majesty. The legal resolution had been complex but ultimately satisfying. David Thompson had worked with museum curators, legal experts, and government officials to create a framework that protected everyone involved while ensuring the treasures were properly preserved and displayed. The items were officially donated to the British Museum under a special Heritage Preservation Agreement. The Queen received no financial benefit from the donation, but she was recognized as the guardian who had protected the items until a proper solution could be found. The most important thing, Camilla reflected, is that the truth came out in the right way. The media coverage of the story had been overwhelmingly positive. Rather than a scandal about hidden treasures, the story became one about family honor, historical preservation, and the Queen's commitment to doing the right thing even when it was difficult. Jonathan Ashworth and his associates had been sentenced to prison for extortion, conspiracy, and fraud. The investigation into their network had led to the recovery of items they had illegally obtained from other victims and the exposure of similar schemes targeting museums and private collectors across Europe. Eleanor Pierce had received a lighter sentence in exchange for her cooperation with the investigation. She had lost her position with the royal household, but her testimony had been crucial in exposing the full scope of the criminal network. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped me that morning with the briefcase, Camilla said to Marcus as they continued through the exhibition. I think about that too, Marcus replied. If you had succeeded in hiding the treasures, Jonathan's network would probably have found another way to pressure you. The criminal investigation showed that they weren't going to give up easily. David Thompson joined them in the gallery, carrying a folder of documents. Your Majesty, I have the final legal paperwork for the memorial fund. In addition to donating the treasures, Camilla had established the Margaret Pierce Memorial Fund for wartime artifact research. The fund would support efforts to identify and return lost cultural items to their proper owners, or preserve them in appropriate institutions. Margaret spent her life trying to solve these historical puzzles. Camilla explained to a group of journalists who were covering the exhibition opening. This fund will continue her work and help other families find their lost heritage. The fund had already received support from several major museums and historical societies. More importantly, it had established a legal framework that other families could use when facing similar situations involving items of complicated ownership. As the afternoon continued, Camilla met with several families whose lost items had been identified through Margaret's research. Many of them had successfully recovered precious family heirlooms that they thought were lost forever. Mrs. Sarah Goldman, whose grandmother's jewelry had been among Margaret's discoveries, spoke tearfully with the Queen. Your sister gave us back a piece of our family history that we never thought we'd see again. She could have kept these items or sold them, but instead she spent years trying to find us. These conversations reinforced Camilla's belief that she had made the right decisions throughout the crisis. The criminal threats and legal complications had been terrifying, but they had ultimately led to a solution that honored Margaret's memory and helped many other families. King Charles arrived at the exhibition in the late afternoon to join Camilla for the official opening ceremony. He had been supportive throughout the entire ordeal, though she had initially feared his reaction to the revelation about the hidden treasures. I'm proud of how you handled this situation, Charles told her privately before the ceremony began. It would have been easier to keep everything hidden, but you chose the more difficult path because it was the right one. The opening ceremony was attended by historians, museum officials, and representatives from families whose items were part of the exhibition. Inspector Murphy, who had led the criminal investigation, was also present as a guest of honor. In her speech, Camilla spoke about the importance of preserving history and the responsibility that comes with being a guardian of cultural artifacts. She also acknowledged the pain that families experience when they lose precious items during times of conflict. My sister Margaret taught me that sometimes the most valuable treasures are not gold or jewels, but the stories and memories they represent, Camilla said. This exhibition ensures that those stories will continue to be told for future generations. As the evening concluded, Camilla took one final walk through the exhibition alone. She stopped at a display case containing the pearl necklace she had been wearing on the morning when Marcus first discovered her secret. The placard next to the necklace told its story. It had belonged to a young woman who had given it to authorities for safekeeping when she was forced to flee London during the Blitz. The woman had died during the war, and the necklace had remained unclaimed until Margaret's research revealed its history. Now, visitors to the museum could read about the young woman's life, see her photograph, and understand the human cost of war through the lens of one small but precious item. Camilla touched the glass of the display case gently. Thank you, Margaret, she whispered. Your treasures are finally home. The security guard who had once confiscated her briefcase was now one of her most trusted allies. The criminal network that had threatened to destroy her reputation had been exposed and defeated. Most importantly, the treasures that had caused so much worry and fear were now fulfilling their true purpose, preserving history and honoring the memory of their original owners. As Camilla left the museum that evening, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The burden that Margaret had carried, and that she had inherited, had finally been transformed into something beautiful and meaningful. The Margaret Pierce Memorial Exhibition would remain open permanently, ensuring that the treasures and their stories would continue to educate and inspire visitors for generations to come. It was a fitting legacy for a woman who had dedicated her life to preserving the past, and a queen who had found the courage to reveal the truth.